Good morning, buenos dias, good afternoon for some of you, buenas tardes. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Patricia Lozano, and I'm the Executive Director of Early Edge California. Today, Early Edge California, the Children's Equity Project, UnidosUS, and UnidosUS are thrilled to bring this webinar to you today to share more about our joint brief outlining a list of immediate actions for the Biden administration and policymakers at the state and federal level to support dual language learners, also known as DLLs. To preview our time together, here's our agenda. We'll start with some opening remarks. Then we'll do an overview of the brief so you can get a sense of the recommendations. Then we'll follow with a panel discussion with a few experts, and we'll end with a Q&A session. We also have a QR code that you see there on the screen that will get you to the brief. So if you're interested in getting the brief, you can just use this QR code. Also, you'll find the speaker bios, and so we encourage to access this page. There's also a Q&A box located at the bottom of the screen. So please feel free to add questions there throughout the program, and then we'll try to get to them at the end of the presentation. Now, I would like to introduce a very, very special guest today. It's Montserrat Garibay. She's the Assistant Deputy Secretary and Director of the Office of English Language Acquisition at the U.S. Department of Education. She's an incredible champion for our dual language learners, and we're thrilled to have her with us. And now I'll turn her to Montserrat.
Is still having difficulty logging on, so I think we can continue with the program, and then when she's able to join, we'll turn it over to her.
Okay. Okay, so sorry about that. So we're gonna wait. I know she's trying to log in, so we'll let her do her presentation as soon as she joins in. So I'm now gonna pass it to two of our very special experts that we have with us today. So first, I want to introduce Carolyne Crolotte. She's the Director of Dual Language Programs at Early Edge California, and Tania Villarroel, she is the Senior Policy Analyst of Early Childhood Education at UnidosUS. Carolyne and Tania will be presenting our brief and recommendations. I'll now turn it to Carolyne.
Thank you, Patricia. We're very excited to bring these much needed recommendations to the field. But before we delve into our actual report and our recommendations, we wanted to share just a little bit of background information about DLLs in the US today. So dual language learners are defined as children who have a home language other than English and are learning 2 or more languages at the same time, or learning a second language while continuing to develop their first language. And DLLs are a large and growing population of children in the US. In fact, they represent 1 in 3 children birth to age 5 in the US. And actually, that's approximately 7.5 million children. And in some states, there are even higher populations of children who are dual language learners, as you can see here on the slide. So for instance, in California, DLLs represent nearly 60% of children birth to age 5, making them the majority of the children in the state. So this really speaks to the need for why we need to ensure we're setting them up for success and really addressing their needs specifically. So I now wanted to share a little bit about the research on supporting bilingualism and dual language learners. So as you can see here on the slide, there are many evidence-based benefits to learning 2 or more languages. So for instance, improved cognition, communicative competence, sociocultural benefits, strengthened family connections, stronger identity development, economic benefits. And actually, we know that the first years of life are the most critical for not only brain development, but language development and bilingual development. However, we need to emphasize that children are only able to reap these benefits when they're offered opportunities to develop their home language as they develop English. and not supporting the development of bilingualism and not supporting the home language can have actually many negative impacts, including home language loss, weakened family ties, reduced self-esteem, and negative academic impacts, which is why it's critical to support children's home language. And with this context, I'll now transition to diving into our brief, which is really grounded in the research on how to best support DLLs and bilingualism. So I first want to take the opportunity to thank our partners who were involved in the development of the brief and who contributed their time and expertise and their resources to this project. I want to give a special thanks to our co-authors at the Children's Equity Project and UnidosUS, as well as our individual expert contributors, Maki Park and Conor Williams. And because of their time and expertise, we're able to share these recommendations with you. And in terms of the process that we underwent to develop the recommendations, so together, the authors of the brief, we conducted a landscape review of all of the national recommendations for supporting DLLs, and we identified which were the most ripe for immediate action under the current administration. And then we identified the recommendations across the following areas, which are listed here on the slide. And now we'll be going over each of the recommendations in a little bit more detail. So our first recommendations, our first and second recommendation are focused on governance, because we know how critical it is for there to be alignment across systems and to have clear guidance and policies for supporting our most vulnerable children, which is why we urge the Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Education to commit to supporting DLLs across early childhood systems, ensuring that new and existing federal policies meaningfully include and prioritize DLLs with and without disabilities across all areas. And we also urge HHS and ED to issue formal guidance focused on expanding access to and implementation of high-quality early childhood education for DLLs that fully recognizes children's home language as a resource. And we'll have the opportunity to hear more about these recommendations from our panelists, as well as some work that they're doing related to this recommendation. And our next recommendation is around data. And we know that we're only able to support our young children when we have strong and reliable data about them and their needs, which is why we're calling for the use of a common strengths-based definition for DLLs that is adopted across departments, as well as more consistent, higher quality data collection related to DLLs and the programs that serve them. So this should include information about children's language exposure, language instruction of programs, and as well as classroom level data on teacher and child language backgrounds. And we'll also have an opportunity to hear from our panel about some groundbreaking work in California around DLL identification and data collection. And I'll now pass it over to Tania, who's going to share about our remaining recommendations.
Thank you, Carolyne. I will continue with our fourth recommendation, which centers on dual language learners with disabilities. Studies show that children with developmental delays, like language delays, autism, or Down syndrome, can learn multiple languages. In fact, bilingualism may possibly impact their social interactions by giving more chances to practice language and social skills across the languages of their families. These children might need therapy in multiple languages and additional support. That's why the Office of Civil Rights at HHS and the Ed Department should intensify efforts to protect the civil rights of young DLLs with disabilities. Agencies must collaborate to ensure equal access to high-quality bilingual opportunities without discrimination, subpar education models lacking evidence, or segregated environments. The Office of Special Education Programs should also provide guidance on the Individuals with Disabilities Act, IDEA, guidance on best practices for assessment, intervention, and family engagement, guidance on data collection, and technical assistance for early intervention and early childhood systems serving DLLs. Our fifth recommendation aims to open more career pathways for multilingual immigrant early educators who share the cultural background of the children they serve. Studies show this demographic representation benefits dual language learners. by bringing an innate understanding of their heritage, lived experiences, and ability to partner with families around home language development. For example, research shows Latino educators' cultural insights support Latino children's bilingual growth and family engagement. HHS should explore incorporating community pathways, apprenticeship, credentialing prior skills, non-English education, instruction, and alternative opportunities into career ladders. Our next recommendation is on assessments. Most assessment tools do not consider the DLL's full diverse language achievements. Actually, when tested in one language, a DLL may score lower than a monolingual peer, resulting in an underassessment of their full capacities. This is why federal and state agencies must define valid assessment methods and tools. Guidance should cover appropriate usage and research-backed strategies when valid assessments in the home language are unavailable, including for DLLs with disabilities. On technical assistance, we urge establishing a new DLL English Learner Technical Assistance Center and allocating funding for existing TA centers to expand DLL work in the meanwhile. Targeted TA and outreach should go to family childcare and also to family friend, family, and neighbor care providers that also share the language of the children they serve. Our final recommendation focuses on the prenatal to age 3 period. This is the most intense brain growth stage. 85% of adult brain volume develops in this stage. Babies start learning languages even before birth, and vocabulary development between 16 to 30 months predicts 6th grade outcomes. Investment is needed in research, training, TA, and policy guidance, emphasizing home language development and early bilingualism in major settings such as early Head Start, home visiting programs such as Meek, and also childcare and development block grant. Finally, funding plays a critical role in making all these priorities a reality. The Biden administration submitted its budget proposal March 11th, and it includes positive steps like $5 billion for universal preschool and almost $10 billion for affordable childcare. There's also a $50 million increase for Title III English learner programs, which aligns with our K-12 recommendations. However, some areas still need attention. Head Start got a $500 million increase from fiscal year 2023, which is good news, but not enough. We also need a stronger focus on DLLs, such as funding for bilingual program grants, workforce development, and DLL Technical Assistance Center. We need to support these priorities with federal investment that meet the needs of the 7.5 million children between birth and age 5 that are developing bilingual skills. Thank you, and I will turn it back now to Patricia for the panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Tania and Carolyne. The actions you highlighted are critical for our DLL children, and we will now have the opportunity to hear from our expert panelists who will share concrete examples of these recommendations in action. So we have with us today Shantel Meek, who is the Executive Director of the Children's Equity Project, Conor Williams, who is the Senior Fellow at the Century Foundation, and Patricia Alvarado, who is the Director of Education Programs at Adelante Mujeres, and Jessica Gutierrez, who's the Program Manager of Early Learning at Fresno Unified. So welcome, everyone. So excited to have this discussion with you all. I know you're leaders and amazing thinkers and supporters of DLL. So my first question is for Shantel. So the brief second recommendation focuses on expanding dual language programs and the need for formal guidance on what high quality early learning programs should look like. It's a, really, important question, and how do we provide high quality for DLLs? Could you explain why dual language programs are important for DLLs and share some of your recent research?
Patricia, happy to jump in and great to be with you all, my esteemed panelists and friends. Yeah, so I think the research that was shared during the overview is really a lot of the underpinning for why this is important. I think I want to kind of hone in on that question of what high quality looks like for emergent bilinguals or DLL children. I think in general, early childhood quality systems, we often don't consider the experiences, the needs, the strengths of emerging bilingual children. We published a brief a couple years ago that really looked at quality frameworks in states that was called Equity is Quality, Quality is Equity, because they should be one and the same, right? And really thinking about how kids from historically and contemporarily marginalized communities experience quality specifically, right? That requires us counting or establishing accountability for things like inclusion of kids with disabilities, discipline policies that unfairly disproportionately impact Black children, and in the case of emergent bilingual children as well, access to high quality dual language education. I think the why was really well laid out at the beginning. I will just briefly, recap that. There are lots of benefits to bilingualism across the entire life course that we know about. We know there's a whole body of baby brain literature that shows cognitive advantages early in life for babies who are exposed to more than one language at home. We know that education research shows academic benefits, which I'll touch on a little bit later. We know economic literature shows impacts on earnings and employment later into adulthood. And we even know that the health literature shows an impact on long-term brain health, specifically Alzheimer's for bilingual folks. So really translating all of these great benefits of bilingualism to early learning programs requires necessarily, right, ensuring access to an environment where kids not only hear a phrase here or there in their home language, but are immersed in it and actually receive instruction in it, right? Too often we kind of go around the edges and, as opposed to really focusing on the core of instruction and what is happening in the classroom. I think that research finds that access to DL experiences in early childhood are critical, right? This is the peak of language and communication explosion for young children. This is where if you have a 2-year-old, right, or a 1.5-year-old or a 3-year-old, that's when, all of these new words are coming and all of the questions are starting, and there's just so much going on in the brain and in language at that point that it is a prime opportunity to nurture that bilingualism. It's also the period of early literacy development, right? A prime opportunity to nurture the biliteracy development. And so those are all the whys, right? And there's lots of research that we could draw you to in reports that we've authored in the past that really look at that. But I think when we're going back to that question of what is quality, high quality early education, if you're serving a program full of dual language learners or emergent bilingual kids with the same home language, say Spanish, and you're doing that exclusively in English, right? Or only learning, 1 or 2 phrases, how is that considered quality for them, considering the science that we just discussed? So we do need more guidance on what high quality early learning is, centering the kids who have been historically left out of those definitions, including emergent bilingual kids. So I keep saying high quality dual language education. We recently published a report last month, trying to think what day it is, maybe it was this month, on what high quality dual language education looks like across the infant, toddler, preschool, and early grade age range. And we look at a whole bunch of dimensions, including policies for these types of programs, program operations, workforce, professional development, family engagement, language allocation, curriculum assessment, all of those things focus on kids with disabilities. So I think we're trying to say we need a shift from asking, is dual language better than English immersion? The answer to that is yes, and it's not because of the research that I just cited, but because of children's civil rights to an equal education opportunity as well. But the question has to be, how do we do it well? And I think the federal government has an important role to play in that, and there's lots of levers at their disposal to do so. They can update the Obama era, DLL policy statement, right? Make it stronger. There's been new research. We know new information since the last time that came out. We can really think about targeting this group of children who have been underserved and under-resourced in these programs through discretionary grant programs like the preschool development grants. You already mentioned Head Start. We know that there is a whole lot of Title I funded pre-K that has to align to Head Start standards, and Head Start has some of the most robust standards, but where is the guidance? Where is the support? Where is the accountability for that happening? I think we need to think more seriously about guidance from the Office of Civil Rights to protect the rights of DLs having equal education opportunities, because again, if you do not speak English and your educational setting is strictly in English, how is that equal education opportunity? And really thinking about segregation and the impacts of segregation when we are embedding, engaging in those policies that are pull out English only, structured English immersion, et cetera. And the last thing I'll mention is the Office of Special Ed Programs, also the Department of Ed, right? We still too often hear that speech pathologists and other interventionists are discouraging families from speaking their home language. And so there's a lot I think we need to talk about there. And here's my little emergent bilingual child joining this webinar. I'll stop there.
Well, thank you so much. I know, you mentioned so many important aspects, and I know people are digesting, and we'll have time at the end for questions. So feel free to add your questions through the Q&A, and we'll continue this discussion. Now I'm gonna ask Conor the second question. Challenges to dual language programs and how policy enablers can address them. We know that that's an issue that we deal with. So could you share a bit about what you found as challenges to expand dual language learners, dual language programs, and highlight how some states, I know you did a lot of work with different states, so just share about the states and the different policy levers to address these challenges.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. And I'm kind of hoping, I wish that one of my kids would wander in the middle of my answer. I would love to see them right now, but I'm stuck at the office. So yeah, as you mentioned, we did this long report back in May. Shantel and my colleague Jonathan, a handful of us last year, trying to get a handle on the demographics of who gets to go to dual language in the United States. I think we've had a lot of talk, increasing amounts of talk, thank goodness, around equity and dual language immersion in the last 5 or 8 years. We haven't paid as much attention, though, to what happens outside of school. We talk a lot about, balancing the languages appropriately, working at teacher mindsets. And one of the things that I've become obsessed with is, I don't want to say shepherding or policing, but I want to say ensuring that the structures around dual language are accessible, make sure that these are accessible primarily for young dual language learners, and as they get older, English learners, call them multilingual learners, emergent bilinguals, whichever term you choose, but making sure that they get prime access to these programs. So we looked at 1,600 programs across 13, 14 states and DC, over 1 million students. And what we found was not inconclusive, but diversity. We found all kinds of different contexts. In Washington, D.C., the gentrification and colonization of dual language programs is a rule. That's happening in almost every program, and it's happening rapidly. In other places, it's not happening much. It really varies a lot by the number of dual language learners or English learners in a particular community, by the scarcity of these programs, by, frankly, the various moments of history when in-migration has begun in particular communities versus others. So because of that wide amount of diversity of dual language contexts, there's also a wide diversity of just terms and definitions and structures and modes of doing dual language. So one thing, and we put this in the report that we're discussing today, one recommendation we've got for the feds is to try to help provide some kind of clarity for the field. Like, this is what counts as quality dual language. When we say one-way immersion, we mean this. We say two-way immersion, we mean that. Here's how it looks. Here's how you can protect it. Here's how you can design it. Here's how you can implement it. That would be a really good start for the field. It doesn't, of course, wouldn't be binding, but having some sort of national repository where we've decided this is what we mean and here's how the field's going to move forward. That would be a great start. As far as policy levers, there are lots of things, and we can share the report out, the May report that we did, which is it's just shot full with different ideas for how to protect dual immersion programs for young dual language learners. But really, if we could do one thing around dual language. It would be around growing the bilingual teacher pipelines. That's it. And partly there's something I've been trying to explain to people lately as I talk about this, is that when we have an equity crisis in public education, it's always because of a shortage. There is no shortage, for instance, in terms of access to public schools. There's a seat for everybody. We have enough seats. It's not always as close as we might like. It's not always exactly the kind we might like, but there's enough. There's no equity crisis in terms of public education existing. The challenge is equity around quality. Do we have enough quality seats, especially for the kids who need and deserve it the most? No, we do not. Do we have enough dual language immersion seats, especially for the DLLs who we know would benefit the most? No, we do not. And so addressing that means growing the number of seats, meeting the demand out there by growing supply. So there's tons we can do around policies for increasing bilingual teacher pathways. Obviously, some of that looks like reducing the cost and the burden of going through traditional teacher training and licensure. Some of it looks like creating alternate certification modes and alternate training modes so that non-traditional teacher candidates have a pathway into the profession as well. Sometimes that's going to look like federal grants that provide assistance to local and state officials to do these things. I'll just leave by saying that there's a lot we can all learn from Texas, which has been doing bilingual education at an enormous scale for about a half a century, while most other states have not been. There's a lot we can learn from smaller experiments happening in places like Gwinnett County Public Schools in Georgia, which has been the beneficiary of some federal grants that are allowing them to do things like pay their student teachers who are bilingual so that they can make it easier for folks who might not be able to afford a full year of unpaid student teaching. And then finally, it's easy to yell at the federal government and say they ought to do this, they ought to do that. There's always more things for the feds to do. But one thing is we ought to give this department credit, the Department of Education. The Office of English Language Acquisition's National Professional Development Grants look to be poised to do a lot of good work. Their competitive priorities for their National Professional Development grants are really encouraging around growing bilingual teacher pathways. And so are their already distributed grants for the Augustus Hawkins Centers of Excellence. So there's some good things happening already at the federal level and so much more that we could do.
Thank you. So it is a great summary, and it's so useful to hear that there's so many states that we can learn from. So I'm sure we can go deeper, but always love to hear what's working for others and maybe what we can take and apply in our own states. So now, we're gonna, our fifth recommendation is focus on the early learning workforce, which Conor mentioned, and how, it is very important to support our teachers and create pipelines. So particularly for immigrant workers who reflect the linguistic and cultural diversity of our communities. We know if the teacher looks like the kids who they're in teaching or in the classroom or at the home, it helps, right? So now I want to pass it to Patricia, Tocaya, so to share a little bit about the work she's doing for Adelante Mujeres, and how this, how is this work supporting, the workforce, Patricia?
Thank you so much, Tocaya. This is Patricia Alvarado, Director of Education Programs at Adelante Mujeres. I know that Caroline gave us some data around the nation for dual language learners, but I want to share with all of you. We're located in Oregon, and in 2022, about 27% of children 0 to 5 in Oregon were dual language learners, according to Migration Policy Institute. That's a big number. And we at Adelante Mujeres recognize that childcare and education providers are essential in supporting all children, especially dual language learners. We also recognize that there is a shortage of bilingual professionals in early childhood education and have taken some intentional practices to address the problem. The first and most important practice that we have adapted at Adelante Mujeres through our adult education program is that we engage Latina mothers in our holistic educational opportunities where they can get the skills needed to attain their GED. We provide them with leadership classes to understand how their role as leaders within their family and community advocates for their children is imperative in this age, especially in early childhood education. We provide them with computer skills, parenting classes such as Abriendo Puertas, And we're also provided with parenting children together activities where they can come into the classrooms of those babies, toddlers, and preschoolers and put in practice with the mentorship and support of our early childhood education professionals, those skills that they have learned in those classes. That has been one of the most successful programs for us at Adelante Mujeres, because our mothers have realized that many of them have a passion for early childhood education, and they want to become volunteers or even staff members in our programs or in other programs in our area to provide early childhood education. This strategy has become a pipeline for a diverse EC workforce without even us thinking about it. At the moment, we have about 19 former parents teaching in the classrooms in our program and our infants, toddlers, preschool classroom. And that's a huge success for us. We have another strategy that we are implementing, which is providing Spanish training and workshops to our early childhood education workforce. And we do that with an individualized lens, understanding each of the staff members that we have, the volunteers, and even the parents that are coming to join our workforce, to ensure that we provide them with the right support to acquire any certification or training that is needed under the Oregon Core Knowledge Standards for them to become ECE professionals. We are also a sponsoring organization under the state recognition system for early childhood education professionals and have a large pool of community and master trainers that are providing high quality in Spanish, in English, or bilingual training, not only to our EC staff in-house, but also to other providers in our community. Our state requires that each teaching staff members, either in-home or childcare center-based providers, receive at least 15 hours of training every year. And most of those trainings are provided by our highly skilled training team in-house at Adelante Mujeres. That's another strategy that we adopted. Another important strategy is the strong partnership that we have created with Clackamas Community College. We are part of their advisory committee and have been providing input to their inspiring and innovative associate program in early childhood education and family studies, completely in Spanish. It's the first in the nation. Clackamas is the pioneer that recognized the need for advanced college courses for Spanish-speaking early childhood education professionals and have been willing to create those courses. I am both humbled and honored to share that besides being the director of education programs at Adelante Mujeres, I'm also an instructor, a part-time instructor with Clackamas Community College. And I provide college courses virtually in Spanish to a diverse population of students who are also knowledgeable and professional in early childhood education. The majority of the students that we serve through the college are non-traditional. These are women, men that have been in the field of early childhood education for many, many years and have had the opportunity to take some community trainings. But unfortunately, because of the English barrier, many of them haven't been able to get a college degree until this program started about 2 years ago. And I'm proud to say that last year, we at Clackamas graduated the first 7 early childhood education providers with an associate degree in early childhood education, completely in Spanish. And this year, we're about to graduate more than 40 providers. Some of these, as I shared, have been in the field for more than 20 years. They know the ups and downs of best practices in early childhood education, but didn't have the opportunity to get a college degree, college education, until this program was created. I want to share that all of these strategies are magnificent to create a diverse workforce development. And you got to remember that it's not a one-size-fits-all program, but a strategic and intentional plan with out-of-the-box ideas on how we can support early childhood education providers to increase their skills and empowerment to provide higher quality childcare and education services to all children, but especially to dual language learners, by recognizing their first language and the importance of developing other languages as they're growing. We want to make sure that the future of our children is bright, especially for dual language learners. And that's why we invest in workforce development. Thank you.
Thank you, muchas gracias. It's amazing. I even like love the name Adelante Mujeres. It's just so inspiring. It just makes me really feel proud of like what we're doing, and thank you for all the work you do. I was just like, wow. I mean, if I could just say celebration for all your accomplishments, like just congratulations. It's amazing. Thank you. And I wish we had more time to keep and understanding more about your program, but thank you for all the great work you do. And I'm sure people will follow up with questions and to learn more and to replicate programs like yours. So thank you. So the third recommendation in the brief addresses the need for consistent high quality data around DLLs. We know data matters. So Early Edge California and our partners sponsor two bills here in California, AB 1363 and AB 393, that helped make California the first state in the nation to establish an asset-based identification of DLLs, meaning that we're focusing on the positive, where we see bilingualism as an asset. And data collection, processes for DLLs. The process was closely modeled after Fresno, and then we have Jessica here, our champion, that we have learned so much from her and all the amazing work they're doing in Fresno. So, my question is, can you share more about how this process and how it helps program support the needs of DLL families? How is this process, developed, and why it matters for programs based on your experience?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Patricia. And as you shared, the AB 1363 and AB 393 DLL identification processes were modeled really closely after our work in Fresno as part of the language learning project. And so I've had the good fortune to experience the dual language learner identification process as a classroom teacher when I first started, and now as an administrator, and really using the family languages and interest interview tool, which is a part of that process, to identify our dual language learners has really become an invaluable part of our early learning practice here in Fresno. As part of our Fresno Unified School District early learning system, all of our families participate in the interview. And I know with guidance, right, with the requirement is only for those children who identify dual language learners, but we know that we value this process and this interview so much that we make sure that all of our families complete it. And that includes all of our families of children who are in our infant programs, toddler programs, preschool programs, right? All of those things that Shantel was sharing earlier about the research and how we know this critical time for language development and literacy development. So we need to start as early as possible to ensure that we have the best outcomes for our children. And so with that tool, really, it was developed to capture that rich history and information about the child and family, and a way to start helping teachers have that deeper conversation to convey to families, we care about your child, right? As a child, as a dual language learner, we want to provide the very best experience for them while they're here in our care. And it really starts guiding that conversation around language and around culture. And through that conversation, teachers really get to build that foundation of that ongoing trusting relationship that we know is so important with families as they work together, right? It's a partnership to support children's home language during, like we said, this critical time in the child's life. And this process is really built on the premise that children have a great capacity to learn more than one language, and that being bilingual and biliterate has many long-term benefits, much of which, like I said, Shantel shared. And so children who are dual language learners really bring this beautiful gift, an asset of home language to their learning experience. And they have these unique needs that teachers can support, right? So families, we know, are the most important partners that we have in supporting children who are dual language learners. They have those untapped funds of knowledge that really can make critical contributions to the cultural and linguistic richness of our care settings. And they really can provide much needed daily support for the growth and development of that home language. And so really using this DLL identification process, using the family languages and interest interview tool, it begins that conversation around the gift of bilingualism and biliteracy. It supports teachers in continuing these conversations with families. And through those ongoing conversations, teachers really have the opportunity to first share the importance of bilingualism and biliteracy, right? They can share some research that being bilingual is a strength that the child can achieve with that consistent language-rich experience in both languages, right? Or multiple languages. And really, teachers can use this time to really assure families that the use of home languages at home is really essential to maintaining and continuing to develop their home language, and it will support their child's English language development as well. And so this process also helps teachers be able to share tools that families can use to support home language at home and support families in addressing any concerns or questions they may have about how to support their child's language development. So really this process, it really has greatly benefited our children, families, and teachers here in Fresno. The teachers get to learn about the child's linguistic and cultural background, and they use that data, right? They use that information that they learn to personalize their planning around each child's specific language needs. So through this process, teachers learn information that helps them personalize the learning opportunities and really immerse the child in the richness of language learning, while also connecting with and meaningfully engaging children and families in the classroom. And based on the information that they learn, teachers are able to plan to support children's home languages. So one example, right? So if an adult in the classroom, if we have an adult in the classroom who speaks the child's home language, we can make sure, right, that we know that, okay, this person speaks the child's home language. We can make sure that person is speaking with the child in their home language, right? Utilizing that strength and that asset to build on the gift that the child brings. We can make sure that they're reading books in the child's home language and singing songs in the child's home language throughout the day, because we know it's really important for children to see, hear, and experience, right, and use their home language throughout the day. And also, if we do not have an adult in the classroom who speaks the child's home language, we can invite families to come in to read stories and sing songs in their home language, or send in recordings of themselves, right, reading and singing in their home language. So it really just helps personalize that planning and start to think about what we can do to support it. But really the most important thing to remember through all the process is that home language is an asset, and it's a strength that our children bring to the learning setting. And during this very critical time period in children's lives, we're poised to help build that foundation for their bilingualism and biliteracy.
Well, that was awesome. Every time I hear Jessica share about Fresno, I remember when I went there to see the programs, and their teachers were singing to the babies what they're, changing them. So, singing in Spanish, and it was like, oh, things like that. You would think, oh, right, it matters, right? And the babies were all happy. So anyhow, I think that really identifying those moments where if you speak the language, you can engage. It was beautiful, and I can't wait to go back. And then also like how important it is to start early, right? And then to really, as much as possible, have those quality interactions. And so thank you very much for sharing. I also wanted to share that California is in the process of developing a cradle to career data system. That's our goal. So basically connect all the data collected across 6 systems. And our goal is to tie in early childhood, right? And that's why we're really pushing to collect data on DLLs, and also for the system to integrate that as part of the process. So we have, a continuation from birth through, K to 12 and college, right? So kids have, so we know who are we serving, and it doesn't stop, right? Because as of today, we don't have that continuation. So we're advocating for that, and hopefully it's gonna happen. So, I wanna thank all the panelists, so much information shared here that, I would love to spend hours and hours just like picking your brain and learning from you. So thank you for taking the time today and for sharing your expertise, and invite everyone here to read the reports. There's so much information there, and use the QR code to access them. And then I will turn it now to Carolyne for the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia, and thank you to our amazing panelists for all the information that you shared and the great work that you're doing in support of our DLLs. I do just want to mention that unfortunately, Montserrat was unable to log in due to technical difficulties, but she's an amazing champion for DLLs, doing great work at the U.S. Department of Education and OELA in support of our DLLs, and we hope to get her remarks and be able to include them in the recording. And then now I'd want to turn it over to Q&A and encourage everyone to add your questions into the Q&A. We've already received a few questions, so we can start there. One attendee asked about how do we create dual language programs that are not elitist? We're seeing some districts serving, higher income and, children, and we're leaving out our heritage speakers who could be benefiting most from those programs. And thank you, Shantel, for including a link to a report that you wrote with Conor. And we'll be sending out all of these links as well as the recording and the slides to all of our registered attendees. But if maybe you could share a little bit more, either Shantel or Conor, what are some recommendations for how we can really ensure we're prioritizing our most vulnerable children in these programs who would benefit most from them?
I was the lead author on that one, so jump in.
Yeah, I'm obsessed with this. December 2017, I published an article in the Atlantic Monthly that I didn't give it the headline. It got this really clickbait headline like the intrusion of white people into bilingual ed or something like that. And I don't know if you remember the news in the United States in December 2017, but it was an intense time. There was some crazy stuff that people were reading about. And for whatever reason, this article went viral. People read this. It was the most read thing on the Atlantic's website for days. It was about watching this happen, this elitism and colonization of the dual language programs in my neighborhood in Washington, D.C. that I was watching that got me obsessed with this. Anyway, that's where this report came from. What can we do about it, you asked? Right. Well, a bunch of things. And this is some of what I was alluding to before. Obviously, the easiest, rather not the easiest, but the best thing we can do is just grow the number. The more dual language there is, the less pressure there is that they'll be swamped out by only the elites. If there's enough seats to go around, then everybody gets a seat. But it isn't easy to grow bilingual teacher pipelines. We have our teacher training systems in the US are not set up for that. So other things you can do as you're designing these programs, as you're implementing them. One, while there are plenty of civil rights obligations that come with educating linguistically diverse kids, they do not have the levels of protection that racial identities do, for instance. That's usually a downside, except in this case, it means you can just straight up set seat quotas. You can say, well, 50% of our seats go to Spanish dominant kids, period, full stop. You can't do that for race because of civil rights protections, but you can for linguistic diversity. So there's no reason not to. If you have Spanish dominant kids in your community who would benefit from your two-way dual language immersion program, you should be reserving seats for them. Two, you should be making sure that when you launch new programs like this, you put them in places with authentic linguistic diversity in the first place. And you have to be really careful about that because we have a fair number of examples, certainly in DC, but also in Portland, Oregon, and elsewhere, where these programs have launched in communities that have lots of Spanish speakers or lots of Mandarin speakers or Cantonese speakers. And then slowly, that actually acts as a spur for gentrification. White, wealthy, often English or usually English dominant families will then move in and take some of the seats. So it's always dangerous when you have real estate linked up to school access. If people can purchase access through the housing market to dual language, they may. So if that's going to be the case for you in your community, start thinking about what kind of transportation options you need to make sure are available. Think about ways to reserve only some of the seats for neighborhood kids, but some for out-of-boundary kids based on language. There's so much else I could say about this. But the short of it is, the way to guard against elitism is to fix it up front, to make sure that you set these protections in place and then you stick to them even when the political pressure gets hot.
Thank you, Conor, for that. We have some more questions coming in. We have a question around the best way to advocate for dually identified students, especially at a young age. Who wants to take that one? Maybe Shantel?
Yeah, I thought, and we also had a parent, it sounds like in the Q&A, with a question about their 2.5-year-old that I thought was really important. So we do a lot of work on the intersection of language and disability. One of the dimensions in our dual language, operationalizing high quality dual language report that I mentioned during my piece is supporting emergent bilinguals who have a disability. And so I think there is a lot to unpack there. I think if we have a bilingual teacher shortage in general, we have a super bilingual special educator and early interventionist teacher workforce in particular that makes it difficult. And so beyond those shortages in that particular workforce of folks who have the specialized, expertise to support children with disabilities, there's also some really inaccurate and deficit-based ideologies that I think still permeate a lot of the early intervention, early childhood special ed disability space that, the rest, kids without disabilities are not immune to necessarily, but it's supercharged in the disability space. So like these ideologies that, kids, it's too confusing to share two languages with kids. It'll cause further delays. All of these pieces that we hear in general are just kind of ill-informed ideologies we hear especially, and in a lot of too many instances, I would say, coming from trusted professionals who families trust, right? The speech language pathologists, the behavioral therapist or whatever, sharing these ideologies. And so I think there is a role for the federal government here. And I mentioned this at the very end of my remarks in the Office of Special Ed Programs, providing some guidance to that workforce and to those systems. One, to linguistically diversify that workforce and figure out how we can do a similar type of thing as what the department's doing with bilingual educators, but really targeted on the professionals who work with kids with disabilities, on accurate research on bilingual children who have disabilities and what is true and what is not true, and different guidance, and in really trying to encourage states and localities to intentionally pair therapists, interventionists, special educators with children and families, taking language into account, because too often it's random or it's just based on geography or it's whatever, and we don't take language into account when making those pairings and grouping folks. And so we need, this is a problem, again, that cuts across assessment, evaluation, the IEP development process, service delivery, like every stage in the process from being identified with a disability to getting services and everything in between. We need folks who share families' home languages to really ensure that we're identifying kids as early as possible. We're identifying them with the appropriate, under the appropriate category so that they get the right types of services, and that we're providing services in the languages that they speak at home with their families. So I'll stop there.
Yes, thank you, Shantel. And as you mentioned, we had a participant sharing about her own experience with her child and how difficult it is to find a speech therapist who speaks Cantonese to support her child. So that would definitely address that issue. We have a question really related to practice that I think would be great for Jessica. Someone is asking, McKenna is asking about, we have many providers who want to support diverse language learners that have no experience and don't really know where to start. If we have any suggestions on what's the first thing that we could move forward with.
Hi, Caroline. I was actually just typing out a response to that, so thank you. The first thing is finding out who your dual language learners are. That's the number one thing, right? And starting to connect with their families, learning about their language experiences at home. And I was actually typing out an answer to say, check out the Language Learning Project. It's not a shameless plug, I promise. We really have some concrete strategies that providers can use and start using to think about how they can engage families and what supports need to be in place for families, how they can think about their environment in a way that supports dual language learners, and then also instructional supports for dual language learners. So really there's a variety of ways, but really it starts with identifying who these dual language learners are, what experiences they've had connecting with their families, and then planning for them. So thinking about your program as a whole and how you can support them. But I encourage you to really, McKenna, check out our Language Learning Project website at pollstrategies.org, POLL strategies.org, or connect with me. I'm happy to speak with you more about this.
Thank you, Jessica. Maybe we have time for just one more. Where we hear about bilingual programs in Spanish, that there are many materials in Spanish already ready to go for those who are looking to expand such programs. However, when we have diverse languages, we have a question here in the chat about Arabic or Swahili. How can we support bilingual programs in other languages where these resources are not so readily available? And anyone who has anything to share about that, some quick thoughts. Patricia, I know your work is predominantly with Spanish-speaking families. Do you have any ideas for what can be done for additional languages?
Yes, similar to what we are doing in Spanish, we have a population here in Oregon, close to Beaverton, of providers that speak Arabic and Swahili and other languages. What we have done is that our early learning hub is convening all of those providers and looking for resources to translate materials for those providers. We share materials like all of the best practices that we have. We know that what works for children in Spanish is gonna work for children in other languages. So it's about sharing resources and looking for state or federal funding to translate those materials, and also work with community members that already have the respect and the trust from those communities to be able to train them on those practices and provide those trainings or those workshops or opportunities for workforce development for their providers. It's about unifying and sharing resources.
Thank you so much, Patricia. And just want to say thank you to all of our esteemed panelists for sharing your time, your expertise, and all of the work that you're doing. And thank you to all of our guests who have joined us today. Thank you for being here. We could be here all day talking about how we can be supporting dual language learners. And so we'll be sharing with you. We encourage you to check out this QR code where we will be adding all of the resources. We'll also be following up with an email with the recording, the slides, and all of the links to all of the wonderful resources and briefs that were mentioned here today. Thank you so much.